A Gulf Airlines flight from Salvador to Sao Paulo erupted into utter chaos on February the 2nd of 2023. In a video taken by horrified bystanders, a dozen or so female passengers were shown coming to blows in the middle of the cabin while the plane was waiting to take off from Salvador International Airport in Bahia. According to local media, the brawl had come about after a woman on board the plane asked a female passenger in a window seat if she could swap spots with her child, who was reported as having special needs. The mother's request was rejected, at which point she allegedly became angry and violent, lunging at the other woman while being physically held back by a member of the cabin crew. Within a few seconds, another woman ran up to the mother and started pulling on her hair and repeatedly slapping her. As shown in the viral footage, a woman wearing a white top subsequently joined in on the hair pulling as the scene descended into a mass brawl. The woman in white quickly stopped pulling the mother's hair upon realizing that her shirt had slid down to expose part of her chest. As the flight continued, flight attendants fruitlessly attempted to break it up, at one point dragging a woman down the aisle to get her away from the other brawlers. In the end, the cabin crew somehow managed to reclaim control and 15 passengers were escorted off the plane. With order restored, the flight finally began its journey to Sao Paulo Congonhas Airport in Brazil, nearly 2 hours later than expected. Number 7. Jessica Ward and Molly Couch. A pair of young mothers from Lancashire, England, got into a drunken catfight after getting locked out of their house on September the 17th of 2014. That evening, 22-year-old Jessica Ward and Molly Couch, aged 21, went on a white wine binge, downing 3 bottles during a girls' night in at Ward's Fleetwood residence. After that, the pair reportedly went to Couch's house to pick some shoes, leaving their infant daughters home alone in the process. Upon stumbling back home, Ward and Couch realized they'd forgotten the keys to the house, thus locking themselves outside, while their babies were left unattended inside. The friends subsequently came to blows in the middle of the street, eventually drawing law enforcement to the scene. An officer attempted to break the brawling blondes up, as one of the babies could be heard crying inside the home. The fire department was able to gain access through a window, whereupon both children were found unharmed in the bedroom. Ward and Couch were both subsequently breathalyzed. It was determined that their blood alcohol levels were around 3 times the legal limit for driving. The young women were arrested, and following the issuance of a police protection order, the children were placed in the custody of their grandparents. It subsequently emerged that police had been called to Ward's house before, following an argument with her then boyfriend when the child was only 3 months old. She was given a suspended jail sentence and put on probation for 18 months. Couch was given a 12-month supervision order and made to attend a 6-month alcohol treatment program. Number 6. Shelia Shornell Maruka and Alexia Elizabeth Tooley. The police in Bellevue, Florida, rushed to Bumpers Pub on US Highway 441 after receiving reports of shots fired during a brawl in the early hours of June the 15th of 2019. Upon arrival, officers learned from the bartender that a fight had broken out inside the pub involving multiple women. One of the individuals involved, later identified as 19-year-old Alexia Elizabeth Tooley, reportedly drew a small handgun from her purse and pointed it in the air before grabbing another woman by the hair and striking her in the head. As shown in surveillance footage of the incident, Shelia Shornell Maruka, also 19, subsequently pulled out a firearm of her own and hit the same woman Tooley did. Then, the victim was shown striking Maruka several times, after which everybody at the bar suddenly ducked down and scattered. As it would later be determined, that was the moment a gun was discharged. Multiple patrons rushed out of the establishment as Maruka hid a black firearm under her shirt and left the pub as well. Shortly thereafter, a gunshot victim was brought to the Ocala Health Summerfield ER, though no further information regarding their condition was provided to the public. Tooley, a resident of the Paddock Place Apartments in Ocala, was arrested in the incident's aftermath. She was booked at the Marion County Jail on charges of carrying a concealed weapon, discharging a firearm in public, and improper exhibit of a firearm. Meanwhile, Maruka, who also lived in Ocala, was taken into custody the following day on the same charges. Number 5. April Newcomb. Florida woman April Newcomb from Palmetto learned that her teenage daughter was going to fight another 16-year-old girl in an empty lot on September the 17th of 2010. Rather than discourage the teen cat fight, 39-year-old Newcomb allegedly egged her daughter on. The woman attended the fight, which was captured on cell phone video and subsequently uploaded to YouTube, although it was later taken down by the platform. In the footage, Newcomb could be heard encouraging her daughter and giving her tips on how to gain the upper hand. She did nothing to stop the violence, as the two teens threw punches, pulled each other's hair and wrestled on the ground. Dozens of the teens' high school classmates showed up to witness the fight as well. Deputies from the Manatee County Sheriff's Office were eventually called to the scene, at which point the fight had already come to an end and neither teen had been seriously injured. The following week, local police arrested Newcomb for failing to report or stop the fight. Facing child abuse charges, she was booked at the Manatee County Jail on a $15,000 bond. In May of the following year, Newcomb pleaded no contest to a lesser count of contributing to the delinquency of a minor and was consequently ordered to attend a one-day parenting class. Number 4. Candice Angeline Ludwig. At around 9:30 p.m. on November the 3rd of 2020, 69-year-old Candice Angeline Ludwig was driving back home to the Palm Cay retirement community in Ocala, Florida, when she got into a physical altercation with her roommate. As it would later emerge, Ludwig was upset with her housemate after she'd spurned their plans to go to the store in order to have dinner with her daughter. When the pair finally did go to the store later in the evening, an argument erupted over whose children cared more about them. In a fit of rage, Ludwig punched her roommate, who was driving, in the arm, bit down on her hand and struck her in the eye. The Marion County Sheriff's deputy who responded to the scene after the victim's subsequent 911 call observed that her arm was bruised, her hand was bleeding, and one of her eyes was purple and swollen. Although Ludwig claimed not to remember striking her roommate, she was nevertheless taken into custody and brought to the Marion County Jail. She was charged with battery on a person 69 years of age or older and bonded out a few days after her arrest. Number 3. Dorchester Beatdown. Boston police were called to the area of Adams and Ashmont in Dorchester multiple times on the night of March the 22nd of 2022. There were numerous calls made about a group of teenage girls fighting, and after responding to the scene at least twice, officers finally caught up with a teenager and her parents who'd been attacked. According to the victim's testimony, after the group of teens had beaten them, one of the attackers sprayed mace and soaked them in bleach. A short time later, police located the teen suspects walking along Ashmont Street and promptly detained them. The individual accused of pepper spraying and pouring bleach on the victims was identified as a 17-year-old female who was arrested on a charge of aggravated assault. Although the teen's friends initially tried to stop her from getting arrested, they were allowed to walk free after undergoing a line of questioning. Number 2. Hookah Lounge Brawl. Early on the morning of March the 13th of 2017, a fight between two women at a bar in Manchester, New Hampshire, eventually spilled out into the street. The dispute had reportedly originated inside the Fire and Ice Hookah Lounge on Elm Street. A police officer on patrol in the area noticed the lounge's security personnel escorting two women out to the street at about 1:30 a.m. The women subsequently began arguing and were asked to leave. According to a Manchester police spokesperson, a group of 6 to 8 patrons then exited the lounge and approached the two women who'd been kicked out. A female patron proceeded to physically attack one of the women, at which point the officer intervened. In the policeman's attempts to break up the fight, he was reportedly struck in the face by one of the female suspects. The officer ended up on the ground during the ensuing scuffle, but managed to regain his footing and pick the resisting woman up, while a man, later identified as 31-year-old Miguel Fernandez, tried to pull her away from him. The officer then moved to arrest Fernandez, who squared up to fight him. The pair ended up on the ground, whereupon another officer tased the male suspect and he was handcuffed. During the course of law enforcement's tussle with Fernandez, the female suspect, 40-year-old Magdalena Oquendo Marquez, managed to flee the scene. She was tracked down and arrested a short time later, as was Jorman Perez Oquendo, a member of the crowd who allegedly refused to vacate the area. A fourth individual was taken into custody for hurling profanities at the officers during the dust-up. Marquez and Fernandez faced the most severe charges, including simple assault on a police officer. In case you haven't seen our release on When Drifters Go Wrong a while back, then we have that lined up for you right after this. Number 1. Amy Anita Joyner Francis. A tragic incident unfolded in a girls' bathroom at Howard High School of Technology in Wilmington, Delaware on April the 21st of 2016. According to the Wilmington police chief, who addressed a crowd of nearly 100 at a town hall meeting the following week, a 16-year-old student died during a bathroom fight that took place before school on the morning of the 21st. The deceased, identified as Amy Anita Joyner Francis, was repeatedly struck in the head and torso by 3 other girls after falling to her knees, which was shown in cell phone footage of the altercation. As the assault continued, Joyner Francis eventually became unresponsive. She was airlifted by helicopter to the Nemours Alfred I. DuPont Hospital for Children, where she died of a sudden cardiac arrest brought on by a pre-existing heart condition and the stress of the assault. In the aftermath, it was determined that the dispute between the teens had allegedly centered around a boy. The 3 other students involved in the altercation were charged with misdemeanor conspiracy. Trinity Carr and Zion Snow were ultimately convicted of the charge, with the former also being found guilty of negligent homicide. The 3rd defendant was acquitted following her trial. In March of 2018, the Supreme Court of Delaware made a controversial decree overturning Carr's homicide conviction, ruling that the teen couldn't have known Joyner Francis was at risk of death during the attack. The court's decision was heavily criticized, with detractors citing the very definition of the negligent homicide charge, which stipulates that a defendant need not be aware their victim will die for them to be found guilty. Number 6. Joseph Roberts. Florida woman Brittany Tavar was murdered in July of 2010 at her home in the seaside community of Ponte Vedra Beach by a drifter whom she'd been trying to help out. 45-year-old Tavar had taken in Joseph Roberts, a man in his late 20s. They reportedly wanted to start a business together designing websites, and Roberts was helping her with an upcoming court case against a neighbor of hers. Tavar was initially reported missing after being last seen at a neighborhood party on July the 6th. There was some slight indication of suspicious activity as her house smelled strongly of cleaning products and the air conditioning was still on. Tavar's 2 dogs were missing also, and they were subsequently found wandering the streets separately in Hopkins, South Carolina on July the 10th. Roughly 3 months later, Roberts was arrested for shoplifting in Seattle, where he was found in possession of Tavar's car, cell phone, and debit card. By that point, federal warrants for his arrest had already been issued for grand theft auto and unlawful flight to avoid prosecution. Florida detectives investigating the woman's disappearance flew to Washington to interview him, entertaining the possibility she was still alive. Roberts initially asked for a lawyer, but 10 minutes later offered his video-recorded confession on the conditions of a cigarette and not being placed in a maximum security prison. He claimed to have argued with Tavar over a DVD related to her upcoming court case. Roberts told detectives that he'd woken up to her screaming at him and in a fit of rage, grabbed a hammer and repeatedly bashed her in the head with it. Tavar was still reportedly clinging to life after the attack, but the drifter then took a knife from the kitchen and slit her throat. He proceeded to clean the scene and disposed of her remains. During his confession, Roberts drew investigators a map leading them to Tavar's body, which he claimed to have wrapped in blankets and dumped in a St. Johns County field. Under a plea deal, Roberts was ultimately sentenced to 30 years in prison for second-degree murder. Number 5. Stephen Farrow. 48-year-old Englishman Stephen Farrow was jailed for the rest of his life in the fall of 2012 after being found guilty of 2 murders which had occurred earlier that same year. Farrow, a homeless drifter at the time, reportedly suffered from a psychopathic personality disorder, due to which he reportedly struggled with self-control and violently acted upon his intense hatred of Christianity. Between December the 21st of 2011 and early January of the following year, he'd broken into an empty property in Thornbury, South Gloucestershire. Using knives, he pinned a note to the kitchen table which read, "Be thankful you did not come back, or we would have killed you, Christian scum. I hate God." On January the 22nd, he killed 77-year-old retired teacher Betty Yates at her cottage in Bewdley, Worcestershire. The elderly woman was overpowered, beaten repeatedly with her walking stick, and then stabbed in the neck.
Farrow was connected to the killing through DNA collected from the back of the victim's hand, which proved to be a strong 1 in a billion match. Roughly 6 weeks later, on February the 14th, Farrow carried out the horrific murder of Reverend John Sudards, aged 59, at his home next to St. Mary's Church in Thornbury. Farrow stabbed Sudards repeatedly, with the killing blows landing in his chest and neck. He surrounded the body with items that included a men's magazine, underwear, an X-rated DVD, and a condom package. The killer also moved a canvas picture of Jesus Christ on the cross and a mirror so that the image would be reflected on the body. Prosecutors later argued he'd done so in an attempt to defile the clergyman's memory and reputation. Farrow then spent the night in the vicarage, watched an Indiana Jones DVD, and drank the victim's beer. He was eventually identified as a suspect in the crime spree and arrested in Kent on February the 19th. Before he was found guilty of murdering both Yates and Sudards, Farrow denied being responsible for the former's death but pleaded guilty to manslaughter on the grounds of diminished responsibility in the clergyman's case. Number 4. Austin and Kathleen Bhutan. In October of 2017, authorities in Golden, Colorado, conducted a welfare check at the mobile home of 63-year-old Mitchell Engel. They found that he'd been killed, and the incident was connected to the crime spree of Austin Bhutan and his wife, Kathleen, both in their mid-20s. They were drifters who'd reportedly been invited to spend the night at Engel's home. During an attack they'd planned together, Austin had first shot Engel with a crossbow as the man slept. Austin missed, hitting him in the wrist, but then as Engel went to his medicine cabinet, came up from behind and slit his throat. The couple then stole his truck along with 2 handguns and various other items from his home and fled to Utah. They eventually abandoned the vehicle and set up camp near Red Boot Garden, above the University of Utah. The couple decided to find a car and force the driver to take them to Tennessee, but after hours of searching for potential victims, Kathleen became frustrated and left. Austin then approached Chinese computer science student Chen Wei Gao, aged 23, as he sat in his car with a female companion. According to court records, Austin knocked on the window to ask if they'd seen his wife. By then, Kathleen had already contacted the authorities, informing them about the Colorado killing. Upon getting no reply from Gao, Austin became enraged and emptied the .44 caliber Ruger he'd taken from Engel into the vehicle. Gao was fatally shot in the neck, while his companion was reported as unharmed but severely shaken up in the aftermath. A manhunt was launched in the foothills near Salt Lake City, but Austin evaded capture by crawling through thick underbrush and eventually returned to the city. He was captured at a downtown library after an alert librarian had recognized him and alerted security staff. In 2018, Austin appeared in court with new tattoos that included the anarchy symbol on his neck, the word cursed above his right eye, and a teardrop below his left. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole under a plea agreement that allowed him to avoid the death penalty. In 2021, Kathleen was sentenced to 16 years in prison in connection to Engel's murder. Number 3. Lila Olegood, Hayes Lampley, and Sean Angold. In early October of 2015, a group of drug-addled drifters killed a Canadian tourist in San Francisco and a therapist near Fairfax, California. 23-year-old Hayes Lampley and his teenage girlfriend, Lila Scott Olegood, were traveling through the state alongside their friend, Sean Angold. The trio reportedly had dreams of starting a marijuana farm in Oregon, and towards that end planned several robberies, 2 of which ended in the death of their victims. The spree began in late September when they stole a .40 caliber Smith & Wesson handgun and ammunition from a Ford F-150 on a San Francisco street near Coit Tower. A few days later, on October the 2nd, they crossed paths with Canadian backpacker Audrey Carey, who, like Lampley and Angold, was in her early 20s. She joined them and they spent some time together, reportedly getting pizza and smoking marijuana. The drifting trio had also been smoking crystal methamphetamine, which they'd allegedly been selling for money to get around. At one point after they'd all gone to Ocean Beach, Lampley and Angold came up with a plan to rob Carey, to which Olegood agreed. At sunset, as they were sitting in a secluded area, Olegood tackled the backpacker. She and Angold tried restraining her but were unsuccessful, and Lampley shot her dead. The drifters spent the following night at the Vista Point on the Golden Gate Bridge, where by his admission, Angold sold Taurus LSD. Lampley, who was identified as the ringleader, then decided to shoot someone and steal their car. The trio targeted 67-year-old Steve Carter as he was walking his Doberman Pinscher on a hiking trail near his Fairfax home. Lampley gunned him down before he and the others made off in his Volkswagen Jetta station wagon. They were located through the vehicle's GPS device and arrested 2 days later, outside of Portland, Oregon. Engel, under a deal, pleaded guilty to second-degree murder, for which he was sentenced to 15 years to life in prison. He testified against Olegood and Lampley, who were sentenced to 50 years to life and 100 years, respectively. Number 2. Scott Watkins. British man Thomas Humphreys loaned his modified 3 Series BMW to Scott Watkins in late May of 2018 during an unauthorized meeting of high-performance car enthusiasts dubbed the Magic Roundabout on Europa Way, Trafford Park in Manchester, England. Humphreys, a man in his early 20s, was reported to have driven the BMW at high speed before allowing 24-year-old Watkins to get behind the wheel. The latter attempted to drift it through a roundabout but lost control of the BMW and plowed into a group of pedestrians, inflicting horrific injuries. The incident, reportedly captured on CCTV footage in its entirety, resulted in the death of 19-year-old Sophie Smith. Her boyfriend sustained injuries that included a broken pelvis as well as a shattered kneecap and was wheelchair-bound in the aftermath. Another victim, named as Colin Burton, also ended up in a wheelchair after suffering loss of kidney function. In addition to a broken arm and leg, Helen Lord was left with 3 missing teeth, a broken nose and bruising to her heart. In August of that same year, Watkins pleaded guilty to charges that included causing death by dangerous driving and driving without a license. He was sentenced to 9 years and 9 months in prison and given a 14-year driving ban. Humphreys had fled in the accident's immediate aftermath and later reported the BMW stolen. In an attempt to cover his tracks, he too was eventually arrested and sentenced to 20 months in prison. Number 1. William Devlin Howell. In 2003, while traveling through Connecticut in a van dubbed the Murdermobile, drifter William Devlin Howell killed 7 women. Howell, whose spree resulted in him becoming one of the state's most prolific serial killers, was already serving a 15-year sentence for manslaughter in connection to one of his victims when in 2017 he was given 6 consecutive life sentences. Howell's MO consisted of cruising around in his van and preying on the women, some of whom struggled with substance abuse when they were alone. The bodies of his victims were discovered in a wooded and marshy area of New Britain, starting in 2007, by a person searching for hunting grounds. While finding the human remains took several years, a partial break in the case had come earlier, following the disappearance of 33-year-old Nilsa Arizmendi. She was an escort and a heroin user who'd been living in a Wethersfield motel with her boyfriend. The man, a convicted drug dealer, immediately became a suspect after Arizmendi had been reported missing by her sister. He passed a polygraph test and told the police that he and Arizmendi had allowed Howell to stay overnight in their room. He reported to have last seen his girlfriend getting into Howell's van on the morning of July the 25th of 2003. The drifter became a prime suspect and his van was seized in North Carolina in April of the following year. The police discovered blood under a carpet, a sample of which eventually proved a 99% match to Arizmendi's. The authorities also found 6 videotapes of Howell having intercourse described as bizarre in nature with women, but the footage was angled in such a way that their faces weren't visible. Howell maintained that the blood stains had actually come from a fight between Arizmendi and her boyfriend. He entered an Alford plea maintaining his innocence but agreeing that the evidence would likely persuade a jury, and was sentenced to 15 years for manslaughter in January of 2007. Within weeks, human remains connected to 3 of the killings were discovered. Arizmendi's bones and those of 3 other victims were found in April of 2015. Howell would later tell a cellmate that there was a monster inside of him and referred to himself as a sick ripper, which subsequently became his nickname. He also told the man that in one instance it had been too cold to bury one of the victims outside, so he kept her body in the van for weeks, slept with it and called it his baby. Howell pleaded guilty to 6 murders on November the 17th of 2017, apologizing to the victims' families and describing his actions as monstrous, cowardly and selfish.
Thanks for watching. Would you rather get caught in the middle of a cat fight between love rivals or a fight between 2 literal cats? Let us know in the comments section below.